Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining and welcome back. Our guest is my good friend Adrian Day, the founder of Adrian Day Asset Management. Welcome back, sir.
Well, thank you, Ivan. Thank you for asking me.
Yeah, it's a great, huge pleasure having you come down. And I wanted to get you down and talk about all the excitement that's happening in silver, in gold. And, my first question for you since we last talked is the gold actually in Fort Knox? What do you think, Adrian?
Oh, I think so, to be honest. Yeah, I think it is. I mean, they've had various internal audits. I mean, there's an easy way to solve this. You just get Senator Rand Paul and Senator what's the name of the guy that said he was refused access? But just get a couple of people like that everyone trusts, take the television cameras and just go in there and
Yeah.
film it. Now, as you know, and probably most of your people know, not all of the US gold reserves are held at Fort Knox. They're held at different bases around the country. West Point has some, Denver has some. But I mean, it's not beyond the wit of man to have a proper full audit with cameras, filming, and everyone can say, okay, we agree, it's there.
Yeah. And I mean the a lot of people I guess have been taking interest lately about it because you had Elon Musk come out and started saying, what's happening at Fort Knox. We should get a video camera and go through it. You have Trump coming out and talking about gold and he wants to know if there's gold at Fort Knox. What happens in the scenario, Adrian, if we do an audit of Fort Knox and you find out that all these people's gold that's supposed to be stored in Fort Knox is not actually there, or if it's leased out, what happens then?
I mean, that would be incredibly bullish for gold, I think. Again, I'm not really expecting that. I'm a cynic. I used to think I was as big a cynic of government as anyone, but boy, uh, I've since found that there are some people more extreme than I am. But so I believe anything, frankly. But in this case, I just think it probably is there. But it's easy to find out and resolve the situation. If the gold is not there, it is, or if in fact the bars have only recently been transported in the middle of the night, then I think it's incredibly bullish for gold.
Absolutely. And what do you make of everything with the tariffs, with between US and Canada and Mexico? Do you believe it's a good thing, bad thing? How will it affect precious metals, the global economy? Yeah, what are your thoughts on the tariffs?
Uh, oh gosh, I mean, fundamentally, I think tariffs are bad. Now, I do think that it's bad to sort of impose tariffs on, the first tariffs imposed are on your friendly neighbors. I mean, what's Canada ever done to the US to deserve this, right?
Right.
Um, I think the problem is we're getting a very mixed message from the Trump administration on tariffs.
Right.
Are they meant to restrict access to Chinese products for national security reasons? Is it meant to equalize? France imposes larger import duties on California wines than the US does on French wines. So is it meant to just equalize? Or is it meant to be a blanket thing? Or is it meant to punish Canada and Mexico or encourage them to take more action to control the border?
Right.
It's just a blanket thing to a way of raising revenue to replace income tax. Now, if you look at the law and the message from the Trump administration has been very mixed. Now, frankly, if there's a lot of countries in the world like Bermuda, Bahamas, the Cayman Islands, countries that we think of as pretty free market and pretty free market countries, and they get most of their revenue comes from import duties, right? So
Right.
I lived in the Bahamas. You didn't have any income tax, no capital gains tax. I don't think there was a tax on dividends or interest. People didn't have to file income tax returns or anything, but the government funded itself through import duties and real estate taxes. Now, we if you're saying we want to replace the income tax with import duties, from an economic point of view, that's a positive thing because taxes on production,
Right.
namely income tax and capital gains tax, taxes on production are the worst type of taxes. Taxes on consumption from an economic point of view, are much, much better taxes if you have to have any taxes at all. And tariff sounds like so harsh and punitive. Customs duties just sounds like another tax. They're the same thing,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Whatever word you use. Now, the reality is that the US cannot replace its income tax with tariffs. I saw a calculation today, someone said, and again, assuming everything stays the same, that you don't impose taxes and then reduce the number of imports. But if the number of imports remained exactly the same, you'd have to have an import duty of 73% to replace the income tax. That's
Right.
obviously not going to happen.
Right.
And so it's impossible. But I think part of the problem is the messaging. And also, again, frankly, I don't think it's politically very good to impose tariffs on your neighbors and your friends as your very first act in office.
Welcome to the Cayman Islands, a premier offshore jurisdiction where natural beauty meets financial stability. Here, your wealth is more than secure. It thrives in one of the most trusted and respected financial centers in the world. For over a decade, SWP has been the trusted choice for precious metal investors worldwide. Our purpose-built 6,000 square foot facility sets a new standard in precious metals storage. Beyond safeguarding your assets, we're committed to making a difference in our community by supporting local causes and events that reflect our values. As we continue to expand and innovate our services, we ensure that your wealth is safe and strategically positioned to shield you from the uncertainties that lie ahead. Strategic wealth preservation, trusted today and ready for tomorrow.
Yeah, no, you absolutely nailed it, Adrian. Because a lot of people are looking at it as like a negotiation tactic to bring them to the table, keep delaying the deadlines, and then just keep bringing them to the table. Other than that, Adrian, other than gold and silver, I guess what's your biggest concern right now? What are you passionate about? What are you having your eye on right now? What's your biggest concern in the markets, the world, geopolitically, whatever it is?
Yeah, well, I mean, clearly the S&P and the Nasdaq are breaking down. We can see that. Um, the Nasdaq and S&P are back to where they were in September, so it's been a pretty big decline.
Right.
Stocks like, Tesla's down 50% in the last couple of months. Nvidia is down 50. Oh, Nvidia is down virtually 30%.
Yeah, and
It,
that's a lot. That's a lot for people who are got in at the highs.
yeah. So I mean, these Magnificent Seven are breaking down, as we've talked about before.
Right.
Um, I mean, in the immediate term, I wouldn't be surprised if we got a contrarian rally because the AAII, American Association of Independent Investors, Bull Bear Index is something like 65% bearish, which is the second highest bearish it's ever been in its history.
Wow.
Um, so, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if you got a contrarian bounce. But I do think there's a big concern that the S&P is going to break down for a lot of reasons. I mean, the leaders are grossly overvalued. There's very bad breadth, meaning we have a small number of stocks going up, and a lot of stocks not going up or even going down, and that's not a good sign for a healthy market.
Right.
And I think the other thing to recognize is that the Trump administration actually wants a market breakdown and a recession now. Because if you have it now, you can blame it on Biden. And it's far enough away from the midterm elections that it won't have an impact. If we
Yeah.
have a recession starting in June, July, it's much more difficult to blame it on the last administration.
Oh yeah, they'll think it'll be Trump's fault and so on.
Yeah. And so they actually want to do it now and get it over with. Um, but now, how does that react to gold and silver? I think we're already seeing a sharp decline. If we have a sharper decline in the broad market in the S&P, I think it's going to start to bring everything down. We saw gold fall today. Because anytime you have a sharp decline, especially with the incredibly high levels of margin that we have in the US, I don't know if you have the same in Canada. I suspect not to the same extent.
Right.
But you know, the level of margin in the US is record highs. And it's not just sophisticated investors who are using margin, but the level of margin at IP, Interactive Brokers, and the Robinhood is at all-time highs. So when you have high levels of margin, when stocks drop, people have to sell, right? They have to sell. There is no
Yeah.
choice. And they have to sell that day, the day they get the margin call.
Right.
And so everything tends to go down. You know, physical gold frequently, as we know, we saw this in 2008. Physical gold is often drops sharply at the beginning of a market crash
Right.
because it's such a liquid asset. And in this case, it's held up well. So people say, well, okay, I can sell a little bit of gold to meet my margin call. So I wouldn't be surprised, sorry, just to sum it up, I wouldn't be surprised if we got a bit of a pullback in the gold stocks. If we see further downside in the S&P, we'll see a bit of a pullback in the gold and silver stocks, even further than where they are now. But they will be typically they will be the first to recover as the margin calls get all played out, and so people, and you know, the margin comes down a lot. The market's down. People then start to say, okay, where should I now put my money?
Yeah, right.
Not going to put them back in the Magnificent Seven, I don't think, but they're going to look for sectors that have lagged. It could be dividend stocks, value stocks, global stocks, Asian stocks, and commodity stocks. And so they're going to start putting their money into sectors that have lagged, or are cheap. And there's no question that even though the XAU and the GDX have not exactly lagged, as I point out many times, the XAU over the past 12 months has a performance as more than twice that of the S&P.
Wow.
In fact, as of today, it's probably three times. Yeah, as of Friday, it was 40% for the XAU and 14% for the S&P.
Wow.
So basically three times. Would you know that from reading the Financial Times or watching CNBC? I have
No.
no clue. But even though they've outperformed, they're still very, very undervalued. They're still cheap on a value basis. They're cheap relative to their own history. And of course, as we've said before, the margins are expanding. So I think you're going to see money once the market stabilizes and you don't have the margin calls anymore. The money's going to start flowing into gold and silver. And I'll just leave you with this on this point, unless you have another question. But I'll leave you with this on this point. It's a staggering that the GDX and the GDXJ, the two largest gold mining ETFs, neither of them has had a single day of net inflows this year.
Hello, my fellow silver and gold stacker. I just wanted to say thank you so much for watching the channel. Subscribe, please like the video, and also hit the notification bell. Keep stacking.
Neither of them has had a single day of net inflows this year.
That's crazy.
The GDX has lost $1.7 billion this year. So the sentiment towards gold stocks is incredibly bearish, right? I mean, it could hardly be more bearish when gold is making new time highs, when the margins are expanding, when the XAU has gone up and the GDX have gone up 40% in the last 12 months, and yet individual investors are simply not participating. That's
Yeah.
got to change at some point.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We're seeing the same thing on our side. You know what? I believe it's going to change at some point as well. Adrian, it's such a huge pleasure having you come down here. It's, every time you come down here, it's like it's a breath of fresh air for everyone, especially in the silver and gold community. You say things so incredibly, and it makes a lot of sense to all of our viewers and myself. Now, before you go, I want people to connect with you. Where can people connect with you?
Well, the best place is the website, adrianday.com.
AdrianDay.com. Everyone, I highly recommend. Please go check it out. Put the link in the description below. And Adrian, as always, such a huge pleasure having you come down. I'd love to have you come back in the future.
Yeah, I'd love to. And thank you so much.
No
Thank you.
problem. Talk to you soon.